Welcome to You Make Sense. This podcast is a manual to understanding your human experience so that you can navigate the world with freedom, ease, empowerment, and create the life that you desire. Remember, you make sense, all parts, always. So in this episode, we're going to talk about how to have and experience a healthy, joyful, nourishing relationship to food. It's something that so many of us struggle with. And of course, it's something that we experience and are confronted with on a daily basis. If that's you, if you struggle in your relationship with food, in this episode, I'm going to talk about why, or a lot of the reasons why we might experience this. And as always, as we do in every episode, I'm then going to talk about how we can use science and therapeutic interventions to help shift this. I struggled with my relationship with food for much of my life. It was confusing. It was overwhelming. I had a lot of shame about it. And throughout this episode, I'll interweave some of my own experiences in the hope that it will support you to feel less alone in yours, especially because there can be so much shame around this dynamic. And what we know is shame feeds on silence. So the first thing I want to talk about is why we can tend to have an unhealthy relationship with food. First thing I want to name is when we use food as a coping strategy. Coping strategies are anything that brilliantly and beautifully covers up the activation or dysregulation that we are experiencing in our bodies. Here's the thing. If no one taught us how to regulate our nervous system, then the options were to be with the perpetual dysregulation we are experiencing. So the perpetual anxiety, worry, frustration, fear, terror, rage, racing thoughts, loneliness, grief, overwhelm, apathy, depression, hopelessness. You get the idea, all of those experiences. We either be with it all the time or we can cover it up so we don't have to feel the perpetual pain of what we can't stop. So isn't that smart? That usually when we were very young, we learned ways to cope. And one of those really brilliant ways is using food. One of the ways that we would do that is using food to numb. So when we found ourselves feeling overwhelmed or stressed, or all the things I just named, we would eat, which would support us to begin leaving our bodies and disconnecting from those emotions and the sensations involved with them altogether. That's something that I did. It's very common, by the way, that people can tend to use food as a coping strategy at night. I did this through middle school, in my teenage years, and throughout my 20s as well. Why? Because nighttime tends to be a time where we aren't distracted with other things. Throughout the day, you might be busy with work and tending the children and all the stuff. And then at night, I'm often just left with me. That means I have to be left with what is. And so for me, I experienced a lot of abuse at night. So this began as a way for me to comfort myself and to disconnect from my body. So I used that throughout, adolescence and into high school. And then later in my life, I used it as a way to not have to be with the depression I felt, to not have to be with the loneliness, the fear, the terror, the grief. And it's very common, again, that a lot of us tend to do this when it comes to the night rolling around. When we're doing this, we are not consuming food as a source of nourishment. We are consuming food as a way to, again, leave our bodies or numb. So if this is you, when you're eating, there's not actually even a real presence to what we're eating. You can almost feel like something's taking over your body and it becomes almost robotic and like I'm floating above myself. I spent so many years doing this, and then there was so much shame about it because I felt really out of control. So let's say, I had a bag of chips in my house or, snacks like that. I would eat them incessantly. Like I wasn't present to it. And then after I finished all the food and felt really sick, I would have so much shame that I did that. So then what I would do is, as a try to solve the problem, is I wouldn't have any of those snacks in the house. But what I would find myself doing is it's like 11 p.m. and all I can do is think about the fact that I need to eat something. And I would drive to like a 7-Eleven or a convenience store and get a bunch of food, and then I'd eat it in the car. I felt so much shame about all of this. So I'm sharing some of my story with you in the hopes that it supports you to feel less alone if this is something that you've struggled with yourself. And another way we can use food as a coping strategy is food to control. I did this as well myself. And what I mean by this is restricting. So this is very common if we've had experiences in the past where we felt out of control inside. I don't know what to do with maybe the chaos of navigating my home environment or the trauma that transpired or the overwhelm of emotion in my body. So we brilliantly adapt and say, well, there's something I can control, and that is my body. And that means I can control the food that I put in it or don't put in it. And then we go into food restricting. And I spent so much time doing this in my life as well, where I was trying to contort myself and contort my body. And this was also a way to punish myself, by the way, because I felt like my body had betrayed me. I would restrict and I would be, lead to really low blood sugar and feeling like I was going to faint and not eating. And then I would go into this binging, so restricting and binging cycle where I wouldn't eat. And then I would be so hungry, I would eat like a whole jar of peanut butter because I wouldn't keep food in my house. And then I would have shame about that. And then the whole process would begin again the next day. And so I just want to name here that these are not things to be ashamed of. These are strategies that we found to support us to have some sense of safety. I also just want to go back for a second to food restricting. The obvious ways that we restrict are withholding food, and of course, anorexia would be the obvious thing that we think of when we're doing that. But there are much more subtle ways that we use food as a coping strategy. For example, when we are hyper strict with our diet. So I don't go out to eat at restaurants, or there's only a couple of restaurants I go to because I don't eat anything that ever has any kind of something in it that's going to be bad for me, like a seed oil. And of course, we know seed oils create inflammation. We don't want to have them. But if I have such a tight grip on controlling what is entering my body, we want to look at that. What is that control about? And why is it so severely black and white? The same goes for really restricting diets and it impeding on our ability to have fullness of life. So it's common to see this also happen when people are being like extremely healthy with their eating. But then it begins to take on a life of its own. And what's underneath that healthy eating is actually this coping strategy. Now, all that's to say, we want to eat really healthy. I eat very healthy. I don't consume processed foods or anything that's really not so good for me. But, last night I had a couple of cookies because I wanted them. And we'll talk in a minute about how we listen to our bodies and we can come into the natural ebbs and flow of what we desire and what we need and how to nourish ourselves. I just want to name that when we're restricting, we want to look at that. And could that be a coping strategy covering up some dysregulation? Another thing that I want to talk about is when food is our companion. This is also a type of coping strategy. So when we experience emotional or physical neglect, whether that was in our childhood or maybe even our marriage or a relationship, in a lot of ways, we're being starved of our primary human needs. Human need to have intimacy and vulnerability and to be seen and connected with and loved. And if we don't get those things, we need to find them somewhere in order to survive. And for a lot of us, we brilliantly found that love and that companionship and that steadiness in food. And if that's you, and by the way, if any of what I've described is what you've experienced, I am so glad that you found that. The alternative would be being with that perpetual pain of not having those needs met. So thank goodness that we found it. But what we will do then in our adult lives is instead of stepping into or resourcing that companionship in community and friendship in romantic relationship, that's very scary for our nervous system because people were historically the ones who harmed us or hurt us or weren't there. Food, perhaps for some of us, was always available. And of course, I want to name for some of us, food wasn't always available. But if that was, it may have become this resource for you. And so we have to tolerate the discomfort of turning towards companionship in other places. In a bit, we'll talk about the process of building healthy relationship with food. I just want to go over some of the other ways in which we might find ourselves not having a healthy relationship with food as a whole. Another is if food was a way that our families connected. It's actually quite common that a lot of families whom are lacking intimacy and deep emotional connectivity turn to food as a way to connect. Also, it's a way we all come together and essentially use a coping strategy at the same time. So for some of us, we oriented towards food equals the only bonding I get. So the idea of taking that away and not overindulging and fueling our body in the way that it wants to be fueled can feel really threatening for us. It can also feel to our parts that if we do that, we will be abandoning our family. So in a moment, we'll look at what we need to do around that as well. But that's a very common thing. I want to, of course, name if anyone's listening and saying, but wait a minute, for me, food was a way that I connected. And we cooked together, and it was, over meals is how we bonded. That's really different. We'll talk in a moment about how we can use food as a source of connection, both to self and to others, which is what it's meant to be. What I'm talking about right now is using food as a resource for survival, or to give us a semblance of safety when we don't feel safe inside. Enjoying what you've heard so far and want to go deeper into somatic healing? I have a free workbook called How to Gain Control Over How You Feel, and it will help you to get in the driver's seat of your experience and step towards your desires with more ease. Check the show notes below for a link to download. Another thing that happens is when we experience trauma, we become disembodied. And that means that I am disconnected from my internal compass that guides me in every way I should go. That internal compass is also guiding you in terms of what you need to eat and how much of it. It's really miraculous. For myself, I was so disembodied. So I was binge eating, then binge at night, then I wouldn't sleep, then I would feel so disgusting the next day, both shaming myself, but also physically didn't feel well. Then I would restrict food, I wouldn't eat all day, and then I would do the same thing over and over again. So that was happening for me. And through the whole process, I was really disconnected from my body as I was doing it. And that meant that even when I was trying to eat well, I didn't know how much my body needed or what it wanted. I just was making guesses. Or I thought, well, if I'm told that's what I should eat, I guess I should eat that. When we're actually in our bodies, we are intuitively led as we eat. And if you look at, again, I know I do this a lot, but I give the examples of animals in the wild. They're not trying to look like whatever body type they're told they should look like. They're not restricting food. They're not eating what a dietitian is telling them to eat. What do? They intuitively listen to what their system needs, and then from that place, that drives what they have or what they eat. Elephants, for example, they're eating, the majority of the day, know to eat specific things based on what their bodies are needing at any given moment. And all animals really have the capacity and ability to do this, and so do we. The more that I came into my embodied experience, it was a wild journey of realizing that this vehicle I inhabit is talking to me. What I would notice, for example, is if I had low iron, I would crave meat. And that wasn't something I normally, was connected to. And I realized, that means I have low iron right now. I'm in need of this. I would crave certain vegetables. And by the way, I still do. I can tell when my body is in need of particular minerals or vitamins or nutrients, because all of a sudden I'll have, let's say, a craving for broccoli. Might not be something that normally occurs for me. And we start to trust that which our body is asking for is what it needs. I'll also name that the more that we do this and come into this internal listening, we'll also listen to our body saying, no, thank you. And then it will start doing that. Our culture, especially in North America, we have a lot of poison that's fed to us. I know that's a strong word to use, but there are so many additives and preservatives that over time create disease in our bodies. So processed foods are not what our body actually needs. Evolution happens really slowly. Remember that. So we are meant to be eating things that come from the earth because that's what our bodies are programmed to be able to metabolize. It's the same goes for why a lot of vitamins are more challenging to absorb for our bodies than food itself, like synthetic vitamins, because our systems are programmed to digest that which comes from the earth. And so our in North America, these foods are addictive. So fast food, processed food, high sugar, high fructose corn syrup filled foods have addictive qualities. So the more that you consume it, the more that you want. And now I'm in this vicious cycle where my body is being pulled towards something that it doesn't actually want, but because it's made to be addicted to it. Again, in a moment when I talk about how to come back into intuitive eating, I'll talk about how we begin shifting it. So now I want to talk about food in the nervous system and the relationship between both. What you eat fuels either dysregulation or regulation in your nervous system. So first I want to go through the types of things that fuel dysregulation, which we want to stay away from, and then the things that fuel regulation in our system. When you wake up in the morning, you have the highest levels of cortisol in your body. And so what is really important is that you don't begin your day on an empty stomach having caffeine. If you do that, it spikes your cortisol even more and brings us into our sympathetic nervous system. And a lot of people start their day, first thing they do, they wake up, they have coffee on an empty stomach. Then they exercise. Then they come home and shower, and an hour later, they finally eat. So now I've gone 4 hours. All I've had was caffeine, and then I triggered even more sympathetic tone in my nervous system through exercise. And now I've landed in a place of high dysregulation. Not only that, but then our first meal is filled with sugar and carbohydrates. All of those things fuel dysregulation. Not having enough protein in the morning also fuels dysregulation. So the higher the protein intake, the more it stabilizes our blood sugar, which allows us to be in more regulation. That goes to the next point I wanted to make is if we let our blood sugar spike, it creates dysregulation in our nervous system. So going too long without eating is not something that we want to do. And things like intermittent fasting, which are good for some people, are not good for everyone. Anytime you hear an antidote, a diet, a protocol, and think that it is, one size fits all, that couldn't be further from the truth. We are all having our own experience, and that means that the way that we tend to ourselves needs to be tailored to us. Another thing that fuels dysregulation is a lack of variety in our diet. Our gut microbiome is a wildly diverse place. And in order for our gut microbiome and good bacteria to thrive, they actually need to be fed. And they need to be fed a multitude of different things, because there's so many different types of bacteria in our gut, in order for everything to be in homeostasis. What we know is that our gut is often talked about as our second brain. So the quality of what's happening in your gut affects the quality of regulation or dysregulation in your nervous system. So the more that we eat a variety of foods, a lot of times you'll hear functional medicine doctors or naturopaths talking about eating a colorful diet. So lots of different colors within your diet, and also eating through the seasons. If it is possible for you to buy locally, if that isn't, of course, possible for everybody, but if you have farmers markets or your grocery store has local produce, eating with the seasons. The more that we do that, the more we create variety in our gut microbiome. Another thing that creates dysregulation is eating before bed. And for a lot of us that are binge eating or using food to soothe ourselves, that's what we're doing. The issue with that is if you eat before bed, your system is not going to be able to go into deep rest. And so the result of this is we have restless sleep. The less rested you are, the more likely you are to be dysregulated. So it's really important that we begin shifting out of that. Otherwise, we're fueling this dysregulated experience. So those are just some of the ways in which we can fuel dysregulation in our lives. A lot of the times I say regulating our nervous system is not just a therapeutic practice. It's what are you watering your plant with? So what am I doing to either fuel my body or to, I know again, this is a strong word, but to poison my body. And the more that I am able to fuel it and nourish it, the more regulated I become. So now I just want to talk about fueling regulation in our nervous system and building a healthy relationship with food. So I want to walk you through some things that we want to begin shifting out of so that our experience of eating, which is something that we do every day, can actually be one that is filled with freedom and enjoyment and pleasure and presence rather than feeling like a perpetual prison. So the first thing I want to talk about is replacing coping strategies with what's called regulating resources. What doesn't work is trying to just inhibit the coping strategy or stop doing it. That's what I tried to do, and I explained that a bit earlier in terms of binge eating at night. So first it was, I'm just not going to eat the food. And I would sit and watch a TV show, and all I could think about was I wanted to go to the pantry and get something to eat. And I would try not to do it. And then all of a sudden I'd find myself in the kitchen eating over the sink in a way that was like numbing out. And then I tried to not do it by not having it in my house, and I'd find myself in my pajamas at the convenience store. So my point is, you cannot just pull away a coping strategy. Why? Because what's underneath the coping strategy? Remember, what's under it is all of that dysregulation that overwhelmed our system. So the protective parts of us are going to say, you cannot do that. Or if you are able to pull it away, it's just going to replace it with another type of coping strategy. So instead, what we want to do is bring in regulating resources. Regulating resources are anything that supports us to feel more present, here, and good. And it doesn't numb or cover up the activation. It actually gets rid of it so it can leave our body altogether. So what I want you to do is compile a list of regulating resources you already have in your life. Anything that supports you to feel more present, here, and good. This could be dancing around the house. It could be going for a walk, listening to music that supports your nervous system, journaling, humming, swaying, tapping. Those are some therapeutic ones. Bilateral stimulation, listening to a yoga nidra recording, listening to somebody who supports you to feel more safe and here. I think I said this, but controlled breathing, safe self-touch, swaying, and a number of course other things. So compile a list of those. Then what I want you to do is have that list handy when you know you tend to go towards using a coping strategy around food. By the way, this could be binging, but it also could be restricting food. That's just the other end of the spectrum. What we want to do is first engage in a regulating resource. So you're telling yourself, I'm still going to use this coping strategy, but first I'm going to regulate. And after you regulate, just notice, does anything feel different? Do I feel any more present, here, and good? Do I feel 2% better, 1%, 5%? Just ask yourself that. It might start with 1%. That's perfect. Then you can let yourself use the coping strategy. Now, the more that you do this every single day, what happens is you lessen and lessen the dysregulation that is being covered up by the coping strategy. The result of this, my friend, is eventually you do not need that thing to cope anymore. So it's a process. We start with what I named. Then I go and I eat, a bag of chips. And then after, what I want to do is regulate again. If you can stop yourself halfway through and regulate again, that would be fantastic. The next time it might be, I'm going to pour a bowl of chips. So I'm not going to eat the whole bag. I'm going to pour a bowl. I regulate before, I eat the bowl, and then I regulate again. And what you'll find is after regulating again, you might still say, okay, I'm going to have a second bowl, but I regulate after that again, and now I don't need the third and the fourth. Well, the reason why this is happening is because you have brought more regulation to your nervous system. And the more that you do this, eventually what transpires is you're about to go binge and you regulate, and then you don't need to. Because I no longer am eating from a place of survival. I'm eating from a place of choice and nourishment. And then you are actually no longer a prisoner to food or a prisoner to that bag of chips. I can have a couple and I notice when I'm full and then I stop. The same goes with controlling food. Instead of limiting the food that I intake, I am now safe to actually nourish my body. And it would be the same process that I walked through on either side of the spectrum that I would want you to lean into. The next thing is we have to begin meeting the needs of our parts. So this is parts work. We have to anchor in our adult self, reparent those parts. So listen to the episodes that I have on parts work, but I have to anchor in my truest self. And then I have to connect into who is the part that is using food as a way to be safe, either to restrict and control or to overindulge and numb. Who are they? How old is that part? When did they first learn how to do this? If you could ask that part, what is food covering up so they don't have to feel it? Is it making them feel a sense of control when they feel out of control? Is it giving them a sense of love, companionship? What is it? So connect to that part. And then whatever it is that food is giving them, our job is to give that part, that thing instead. So the more that I give my parts that internal safety and control, guess what happens? They don't need to use food to control. The more that I give those parts of me a sense of love, no longer do they need food to be the ultimate source of love, because now we are those things. So that, along with replacing coping strategies with regulating resources, is vital. And that also includes, everybody, building internal safety. That's what we're doing as we're doing this parts work. The next thing I want us to do is titrate intuitive eating. So the first step in doing this is, and I guess this could be the step before, is building regulation in our nervous system. When we've experienced trauma, we are disembodied. We are not present to our bodies. So the more that you open the aperture of regulation, I am doing this consistently again and again and again. Those are called neural exercises. The more that your system begins to see it is safe to be present. And another thing that you can do is use all the senses you have access to be present to what's occurring in your body. Can I feel sun on my face? Can I hear the sound of music I like? Can I feel the softness of a blanket on my body? You get the idea. Can I come into presence? Then what would like you to do is I want you to regulate before engaging in eating. So the more that I'm present in my body, then I can listen. From that place, I want you to first ask yourself, am I actually hungry right now? Just see if you can notice and ask your body, am I actually hungry? A lot of times I was so disconnected from my body, I didn't even know when I was hungry, and I would only know when my blood sugar would get so low that I felt like I was gonna pass out. So embodiment is key. And then from this place, we want to see if we can listen to what our body wants. And that might start with, I'm really thirsty. Amazing. What told me that? And then let yourself have a drink. Oh, I'm craving a warm meal. What told me that? Where does that live in my body? And then we want to begin giving our bodies what it is asking for. And we want to do this in a titrated way. So if you restrict food, then what I want you to know is your system's going to say, it's not going to be safe to eat, because if I eat, I won't be in control of my body. And if I'm not in control of my body, I won't be loved because I won't be perfect and blah, 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 blah. So we do this slowly so we can show your system nothing bad happens. And then just see if you can be present to that which you are digesting and eating. Intuitive eating also means sometimes I'm going to really want to eat something that isn't just a fruit, a vegetable, a complex carb or a protein. I have been really wanting to get, I think I'm going to do it today. There's this new coconut ice cream at this very fancy grocery store in Los Angeles called Erewhon, and I'm going to get it. Now, is that the most healthy thing for me? No. Is it unhealthy? No. It's probably the healthiest version of ice cream you can have. But it's certainly not like eating, asparagus. Point of what I'm trying to make is I allow my system and my body to have the desires that it's wanting. And when we're eating that thing, our goal is that we can be really present to the pleasure of it. What can be really helpful in this is connecting to parts. So your younger parts. So imagine that you had a younger part of you, and probably this is a young part showing up who might be, having these experiences of controlling food or binging food. You'd really want them to be able to have freedom around eating. So if you knew that kid really liked vanilla ice cream, you wouldn't say you could never have that because it's super bad for you. You would say, yeah, in moderation, we can have it. Maybe that's a treat we do once every Saturday afternoon or every other Saturday, whatever. And you go get ice cream together. And now it's a connecting experience, not an experience of numbing or leaving our bodies. That's really important. When we're eating, it is meant to be a high level of connectivity to ourselves. So connect to that part that uses food to feel safe. And imagine you're going with them to have that, really great donut at that place down the street on a Sunday morning, and experience the goodness as if you were watching a 5-year-old eat this amazing thing. You'd want them to enjoy it, right? Can I be present to that with myself? That's a really big part of intuitive eating. It's not just listening to my system that's saying, oh, I think, I need carrots because I'm needing more vitamin E, but actually indulging at points and experiencing pleasure from food. We're showing our system that food is safe for us and it's supportive for us. Another thing that we want to do in terms of bringing regulation to our nervous system with food is time of day that we eat. Really important in the morning that the first thing that you do before ingesting caffeine, if you're going to have caffeine, it's something that I have every day, but I start with protein. For me, that looks like having a cup of bone broth. I know that might sound horrible, but it's high in protein. I put some collagen in it, so now I'm already at about 20 grams of protein, and it's really good for coating the gut, so very good for your gut microbiome. And then I'll eat a high protein breakfast of some kind, whether that's eggs and that has some fat, avocado, or I'll make a protein shake. And then I have a cup of coffee with that. So I am not skipping breakfast, and I'm also not digesting coffee before I have any protein. Really important. So high protein, low sugar breakfast, caffeine after that, or at least in tandem with it. And I'm saying this as somebody who I used to not eat until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I would do an intense workout in the morning, very intense for an hour. I would drink about 2 cups of coffee, and then I would continue not eating until the afternoon. And I wondered why I was so dysregulated all the time. So the more that you do this, the more it helps to stop your cortisol from spiking and also your blood sugar. And then what's really important is we are not waiting too long to eat throughout the day. So if you're somebody who likes to graze and snack, that means I'm allowing myself to do that throughout the day. I also want you to really see if you can check in with your body every 4 to 5 hours to see, is my body needing anything right now? I'm sharing that specific amount of time for many of us who are disembodied, not connected. It can be really helpful to have a check-in point. And if you're used to food restricting, then this can start with, I'm going to have, as a snack, a tablespoon or 2 of almond butter, or I'm going to eat an apple, or I'm going to eat some, a few pieces of leftover chicken that I have in the fridge. So we want to titrate it and not expect ourselves to, if we've been restricting food for a long time, to then be eating these really big meals. Otherwise, our protective parts are going to come online and say, no, we're not going to do that. Another thing that's really important to keep regulation in our nervous system is not eating before bed. Ideally, it would be 3 to 4 hours before bed, no eating, but at the very least 2 hours. The reason is because we need that food to start digesting so that when you lay down to go to sleep, your system isn't going to work. If your system goes to work, it doesn't allow you to have deep, restful sleep. And what we know is that sleep is a pillar of having regulation in our nervous system. So that's a really important thing to focus on as well. And then lastly, it's important that we try to avoid caffeine between 8 to 12 hours before bed. A lot of sleep specialists say no caffeine at all, or at the very least 12 hours. I know that might seem really challenging for you. So maybe it's starting with no caffeine after noon, and limiting that intake in the morning. If we have caffeine later in the day, it doesn't allow for our circadian rhythm to allow us to go into deep rest at night. So all of those things helps to fuel more regulation in our nervous system and are imperative in building health in terms of our relationship to food. It really is a relationship. And I want us to be kind to ourselves if we struggle with food. That's not because something is wrong with you. It's also not because food is the enemy. It's because food was the necessary and perhaps only resource that we could use or find to support us to not have to feel the perpetual pain of what was happening. So if we regulate our nervous system, we address our parts, both of those things are really the foundation for how we change out of these patterns of using food as a resource for survival. And from regulation, food can actually be an experience that is joyful, that is nourishing, that we look forward to, and is deeply, deeply connecting, both for ourselves and can be a source of connection with others. You make sense is something that I have been saying for a very long time. It began by saying it to myself. As I was venturing on my own healing journey, it became so clear to me how I wasn't broken and things weren't confusing. They and I made so much sense. And then I found myself saying it to my individual clients when I had an individual practice. And then it moved beyond that into creating programs and offerings for other people around the world so they could experience that too. One of those programs is called You Make Sense. And inside of that program, I take over a decade of clinical training and therapeutic expertise, and I bring it all together in one place. More often than not on our healing journeys, we have to go to so many different providers to get different interventions or modalities. Things like parts work or IFS, somatic experiencing and that kind of embodied work, boundary work, attachment and relational work. That's what I had to do on my journey. And it's an exhausting process to have to find so many different practitioners to go to. You Make Sense came into existence because what I realized was how much each of these modalities need each other, like a web, in order for us to experience holistic healing. So all of them are brought together inside of this program so that you don't have to go to multiple clinicians or practitioners. You can get it all here in one place. The program also brings you through a roadmap that is necessary for holistic change and healing. It's not public knowledge that there's actually an order to the healing process. And when we follow that order, things happen in a really expedited way. This program is only offered twice a year, so I invite you to get on the waitlist for it. We've linked that in the show notes. And when you join the waitlist, you get limited time access to reduced pricing. Check out the show notes to join. The second half of every episode we do here is always a Q&A. The reason why we've structured it that way is because it can feel really helpful to have real life examples of what it's like to embody this work. So if you have questions at all about your own healing journey, about how to navigate life, how to live a fuller life, I really invite you to submit them to us. We have a link in the show notes for you to do that, whether that's a written question, a video question, or an audio question, and they can remain completely anonymous. A lot of the time when we listen to questions, they actually inspire full episodes. So you never know, that might be the case for you too. So let's get to the 3 that we have for today.
Hi, I wondered if you could comment on the blood sugar levels and the nervous system dysregulation. I noticed that when my blood sugar drops, my nervous system can become quite dysregulated, and it can really depend on what I eat and when in the day, how regulated my nervous system is. So I wondered if you could comment on the mechanisms behind that and how that is related. Thank you.
So one of the reasons our blood sugar spikes is because we aren't giving our system the proper nutrition that it needs. And then that raises our cortisol levels and increases our sympathetic tone in our nervous system. So you know that saying, you are what you eat? It's really true. How we eat not only affects our organ systems and our bodies and the way our body looks, it also affects our nervous system in a profound way. So I could, have a lot of regulation in my nervous system, but if I skipped eating for too long a period of time, I will become dysregulated. I tend to have really low blood sugar. So personally, I have to eat pretty frequently and need to have snacks around and in my bag just to take a few bites of something. Otherwise, what's going to happen is I could go from feeling fantastic and wonderful and regulated to feeling either really out of it or really anxious. The longer that you go with being in this pattern of spiking your blood sugar, the more that we are shaping our nervous system in a tone of dysregulation. So the consistency is really key here. And I don't think it's talked about enough in terms of regulating our nervous systems that we have to take into account what we're eating as well. So let's get to the second question that we have today.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for the work you're doing. I'm so happy I found your Instagram account and the podcast you've been doing. So my question is, for my whole life, I've been comfort eating and emotional eating. And every time I go through these cycles to lose weight, but then I just stop. It doesn't work and I keep on gaining weight. So I'm such an emotional eater, and that's the first thing I go to. And I've tried so many modalities. And just recently I learned this is rooted in childhood trauma as well. So I would love your insight on this. Is emotional eating and overeating, is that based in childhood trauma? And if so, do you have any tips to help me with this? Thank you so much for all your work. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you for listening. So it is definitely based in trauma. I don't know if it's childhood trauma or trauma later in your life, but when we find ourselves emotionally eating, remember that's a coping strategy like we talked about in this episode. And so what is necessary here? A couple things. Number one, regulation of our nervous system overall is imperative. Second, you have to reparent the younger part that is emotionally eating because they feel unsafe, unloved, unseen, unknown. That means I have to build my capacity to be an adult me and get to know who that part is. The more that you nourish those parts and they are fed what they never got, the less they need to use food as a nourishing point of emotional fulfillment and emotional nourishment, because now they're getting it with you. It's very important that you explore parts work around that. So who is that part that's doing that? We don't want to shame them. We want to thank them for finding a way out, and then we want to comfort them. So the other thing I didn't say in this episode yet is that when we experience trauma that involved our bodies, let's say it was physical abuse, maybe we were perpetually bullied when we were seen, maybe it was sexual abuse, that our system says, okay, when I am seen, something bad happens to me. So I'm going to try very hard not to be seen. And one of the brilliant ways that our systems can do that is by holding on weight. It's saying, well, if I have this extra weight, maybe I can be more invisible. Maybe I can be more seen and unknown. Maybe that bad thing that happened when I didn't have this extra weight on won't happen. Does that make sense? It's our system really in a brilliant way trying to keep us safe. Now, if you haven't created the internal safety, you mean you haven't become the ideal protector of those parts that were harmed, then your nervous system is not going to let you lose the weight. I've done this work with a lot of people who, no matter how much they exercise and how much they dieted, they couldn't seem to lose the weight they wanted to lose. I also just want to give this caveat. It's really important. I know this episode's not on body image. We have an episode on that, but there is no one right type of body. And it's also very important as we're intuitively eating, we're going to get a sense, not just a sense, your body's going to show you the, what's the right word? It's going to show you the way in which it's meant to be and to be experienced, meaning how much weight you're supposed to have on your body, the frame of your body, the amount of fat that you're supposed to hold in your body. And that will be different based on who we are. Instead of trying to contort ourselves, the goal is that we can allow our bodies to thrive in the way that they're meant to thrive. The size of an oak tree is really different than the size of a palm tree. They look different. The trunk of the tree is different. And so the same is true for us. So we need to build our capacity to allow for that. Now, when I become the primary protector to those parts of me that were harmed, they no longer need the protection of that weight. And miraculously, and also not so miraculously, because it's all makes so much sense, then the weight begins to come off. These protectors are really powerful. They are dead set on ensuring you're safe. So that's just one way that they do this. So working with those parts is really important. Let's get to the last question we have today.
I am 46 years old and I have been struggling with body image and food since I was, I think, 11 or 12 years old. I come from Latin America, from a very, very superficial society where bodies have to be perfect and women have to be soft and sweet and submissive. That was also made clear to me in many ways by my surrounding at school, other girls, society in general. I believe that I created this image, this protecting part that is very strong, that is an overachiever, that is smart.
So a couple of things here. The way in that I want you to use to shift this is working on parts work. The reason I'm saying that is because you said at 11 or 12. So that means that there was a message or conditioning that this young, sweet girl got that as she was not right. And she had to be a specific way in order for her to be loved, in order for her to be accepted. It sounds like that was happening in your family of origin, but also culturally. So a vulnerable part said, wow, this is really painful to not be accepted as I am. And in that moment or soon after, a protector developed, the one you just named, who's an achiever, who's maybe a perfectionist, and said, if I contort myself, if I make myself as perfect as possible, my family and my culture will love me. And of course, that is to the suffering of ourselves. But we get our higher need met of belonging and love. Now, the way out of this is, it's very important that we do this parts work as I named, where you anchor in adult you. Who is this 46-year-old woman when you're actually in you? How does 46-year-old you feel about an 11-year-old who is made to feel like as they are is not right? I mean, this isn't my story, but I'm thinking about this and imagining an 11-year-old who, it is really wanting, it's a Friday night and they're having a nice night with their mom and they're wanting to have popcorn and a piece of cake. And their mom says, even lovingly, like, oh, honey, you can't have that. No, that's too much, or honey, I think it probably is a good idea if you go on a diet. I'm going to start making you different things at home. Even that message is coming from a place of kindness, but can you hear what's actually there? As you are is not right. It's wrong. It's not good. It's disgusting. It's unlovable. And that creates in adult me so much empathy and compassion. What I would want for that 11-year-old is total freedom around food. Now, my job as the parent is not to say to a kid, like, you can eat candy every single meal. Of course not, right? I have to set boundaries. and that's the job of a parent, but that I am connecting with them around eating. So it is a connected experience. And I am also fueling them with having their emotional needs met by me. So food is not a source of getting our needs met. And then I would want to support them to have pleasure and joy in what they were eating. I'm sharing that because I want you to use an as-if tool. So imagine if you were with a child who experienced what you did. What does it make adult you feel? And what does it make adult you want to do? So we must begin becoming that parent. And a part of that means you have to fall in love with her. See her for who she is, perfect, wonderful, incredible, and also fierce and fiery and powerful. Because I'm naming that because you said in my culture, women are seen as desirable when they're soft and helpless and so on and so forth. So we want to really celebrate the power of this part, this younger part, and also celebrate in connectivity, communing over food, and them and her listening to in her internal knowingness and the message that as she is exactly right. The more you do that parts work, the more she actually believes it. And the result is that adult you gets to show up differently with food and in your life. When you say this has been happening from 11 or 12 till 46, what that means is that 11 or 12-year-old has been living your life when it comes to food this entire time. And the beautiful thing is you can set her free, and her being free means you're free too. So thank you everybody for being here today and joining me in this episode. So many of us struggle to have a healthy relationship with food. And so my hope is that in hearing some of these things and getting some of these resources, it supports you to transform your relationship just as I did mine with food too. Sending you lots of love and kindness, and I will see you next week. Enjoying this episode and want to go even deeper into somatic healing? You can join my email community for weekly teachings, tools, and live events. Click the show notes to join.